You're tuned in to the Dr. Kinney Show, and I'm your host, Dr. Erin Kinney, a naturopathic doctor and speaker dedicated to unraveling the mysteries of your body and guiding you back into balance. Let's get started. Hey, real quick, guys, before we start the episode, I want to share something that I'm really excited about. I know how hard it can be when your hormones feel out of balance, low energy, mood swings, and not feeling like yourself, which is why I created the supplement line Optimal Harmony. With natural science-backed ingredients, it's designed to support your hormones, stabilize your mood, and help you reclaim your energy and confidence, because when your hormones are balanced, everything feels easier. You deserve to feel amazing every day, so let Optimal Harmony line of supplements help you get there. Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of the Dr. Kinney Show. This week, I would like to have a conversation about GLP-1 medications. So Wegovy, Zepbound, Semaglutide, and there's a lot of information out there right now, and I want to talk about how they can be used correctly as a fantastic tool. Now, they can also be used incorrectly and cause a whole host of problems, but when they are used correctly, they can be game changers, and not only for weight loss, but for reducing inflammation. So first I want to talk about, kind of what this medication, what is it working on? And what it's really working on at the end of the day is it's working on changing your body's ability to regulate glucose and insulin. And so before I dive a little bit more to that, let me give you guys a little reminder. If you don't understand how glucose and insulin work, I find a lot of my patients, when they come to the office, they kind of have sort of an idea, but when I explain it to them, they're like, oh, that makes so much sense. So here's my explanation. So all of your cells in your body need to have glucose inside of them in order to do their job, right? Your cells are not going to function if they don't have glucose. So what happens? We eat food, the body turns the food into glucose. Glucose is hanging out in your bloodstream. When there's glucose in the bloodstream, the pancreas gets a signal to produce insulin. And the body has developed this really cool system where glucose can only come inside your cells if insulin has already bound to an insulin receptor. So the body basically has these two gates or doors, if you will. One's for insulin and one's for glucose. Insulin binds first, which then opens the door that allows glucose to come in. And so that's how it works. Glucose comes into the bloodstream, insulin binds to the cell, glucose comes into the cell, your cells have energy, they can do their job, you feel great, all's great. Now, if you go through a period where you have a ton of glucose coming in and the cells get super saturated and your cells are, for lack of a better word, lazy and not doing a lot of work, the body's kind of built-in mechanism to make sure we don't get too much glucose inside the cell is it stops making the door or the gate for insulin. So it downregulates the production of these insulin receptors. What happens at this point is if you keep eating food or glucose and not using it, glucose will raise in your bloodstream, and insulin will also keep going up in the bloodstream, because every time glucose comes in, the pancreas produces insulin. But if insulin doesn't get bound, then glucose can't get inside your cell. So, and oftentimes what will happen is, the body gets into this insulin resistant state where we're not making insulin receptors, and you might use up all the glucose inside your cell. But then once that happens, you might eat food, but the energy isn't getting into your cells. So you've eaten, you're full, you should have energy, but you actually don't have energy because, again, the glucose isn't inside your cell. The second thing that happens in this situation is glucose is going to stay really high in the bloodstream. And glucose, while we need it and it's really important, when there's too much in the bloodstream, it kicks up inflammation. I would argue that probably 90% of inflammation in the body is from elevated glucose in the bloodstream. The third thing that happens is you've got all this glucose in the bloodstream. You now also have a lot of insulin in the bloodstream, and the way the body, when insulin is high in the bloodstream, it sends a signal for all of that excess glucose to get stored as fat. So when you're in this insulin-resistant state, not only is it hard to lose weight, but it's also very easy to gain weight. And so now you're gaining weight, and you don't have any energy because there's no glucose inside your cells. So you can see it's not really a great place to be in. So there are natural ways to address this. First, anytime you exercise, particularly anytime you lift weights and build muscle, one of the reasons why building muscle, and I feel like it's all over the internet right now, is lift heavy. And it's really effective because every time you build a new muscle cell, it comes with, I like to joke, it comes with shiny new insulin receptors. So each new muscle cell is going to help mop up more insulin and more glucose. And the lower the amount of glucose you have in the bloodstream, the less inflammation you're going to have, and the lower insulin you're going to have in the bloodstream, so the body will go into fat burning mode. So building muscle not only helps with weight loss, but it also will help reduce inflammation in the system.
So that's one of the ways that we can kind of work on insulin resistance naturally. There are also other herbs and other things that will help increase the production of insulin receptors. Berberine is a really commonly talked about one. It's one of my favorites. And anytime you eat fruits and veggies with tons of antioxidants, that gives the body kind of the tools that it needs to make more insulin receptors. When you move your body and you burn through glucose that's inside the cell, the body should be like, oh, hey, I need more glucose. Let me make more insulin receptors. But sometimes the system has gotten kind of too far down this insulin resistant path, and it is really hard to make that change. And so here's where GLP-1 medications can come in and be really, really helpful. The main thing that these medications do is they help the body make more insulin receptors. So they're going to help you become more insulin sensitive. They also slow down gastric emptying, meaning you stay full longer, and so you're not going to be as hungry. But the reason why there's can be so much benefit from these meds is what they do with the glucose-insulin pathway. Now, let's talk about first how you can misuse these medications, because it is very common, and I've had patients come in where they have definitely misused these medications, and one, the medication hasn't worked for them, or two, it's worked so well that they've lost so much weight, not only did they lose fat, but they also lost muscle cells, and then when they went off the medication, they gained weight. They may have also had terrible side effects. So these drugs, when used at misappropriate dosing. So if you take too high of a dose, and meaning you're not going to feel well, you're going to be, your gastric emptying slows down way too much. You might be constipated, you might be nauseous, and your blood sugar can actually drop quite drastically, which can cause a whole host of other symptoms. We hear a lot of reports of like vision changes and, muscle fatigue, and people can lose their hair. But that's all when they are used too quickly and at too high of a dose. If we go the other direction, if you take these drugs at a much, much lower dose, the term that's kind of being used is microdosing, and that term is great, but we could also talk about like the lowest possible therapeutic dose is kind of the terminology that I like to use. It's like, hey, what is the lowest possible dose of this medication where we see, maybe your hunger goes down a little bit and you have a little bit of like slowing in the gastric emptying, but we actually see a reduction in inflammation. We see, your blood sugar levels changing, which can equate to one, weight loss, but also to a reduction in inflammation. And so what we try to do is we find the dose that is going to be effective, but is not going to be causing side effects, is not going to be making you lose weight so quickly that, again, you're losing muscle mass and all of that. So really, when you use these meds at the appropriate dosing, they are, the things that I've seen on patients' labs, I've been kind of blown away. And I'll be honest, when kind of these meds first came about, I was really nervous. I'm like, this seems like a crazy weight loss fad. I think we're going to completely steer away from that. I don't know about this, hearing lots of the bad side effects and everything. But, it was interesting. This summer, I was at my annual naturopathic convention, the A&P convention, which they run every year. And I hadn't been in a couple of years. And a lot of the talks were on using GLP-1 medications, and really there were not very many talks about for weight loss. It was using them for reducing inflammation, for lowering cholesterol, for preventing heart disease, preventing Alzheimer's, because of what they do for lowering blood sugar and keeping blood sugar in a more stable place. And I came away with that being like, wow, and we were already using them in our clinic with patients that, kind of really needed some help in that regard in terms of weight loss. But now it's interesting. I've been looking at a lot of patients that have really chronic inflammatory conditions, and we've started to, recommend these, low therapeutic doses. And as I've said, the results are really astounding. I've had patients where, their hemoglobin A1C is really, really elevated, like at a 7.8. Their fasting glucose is elevated. Their insulin is very high. Their cholesterol is high. They're having headaches and fatigue and joint pain. And after 3 months on a low therapeutic dose of a GLP-1, we tend to use tirzepatide, which is a dual-acting one. I can get into that later at some point if you'd like. But that their labs in 3 months changed so drastically. I had this one patient whose A1C dropped from a 7.8 to a 5.5 in 3 months, which is a huge drop for an A1C. Fasting glucose was normal. Their cholesterol came down about 50 points. But the better part of the story was joint pain was gone, no more headaches, their energy level was way up. And if you think about what I explained earlier, when we're increasing insulin sensitivity with one of these tools, what that means is their cells that prior to starting this medication were starved of glucose. They had tons of glucose in the bloodstream causing all this inflammation and high blood pressure and the high A1C, but their cells weren't getting what they needed to produce energy. And once we allowed their cells to actually uptake that glucose better, one, the cells could do their job, so their energy is going to go up. And two, there wasn't all this glucose floating around the bloodstream. So that means lower cholesterol, that means lower inflammation, that means no more diabetes or prediabetes. So again, these medications can be used as a fantastic tool. But I like to caution people to say, listen, it is a tool and it needs to be done in conjunction with other lifestyle things. And two, it needs to be done at the right time. So I'm going to share one patient's story who had come to me and she'd already been taking a GLP-1 for about 4 months, and she was feeling extremely frustrated. It had taken her a while to wrap her brain around trying one of these medications. I think her primary care had recommended that she go on it. She'd been struggling for a long time to lose weight, but no one had really investigated why she wasn't losing weight, and she was extremely burnt out. Her adrenals, when we ran labs, her cortisol was like a 3. It was super, super low. Her sex hormones were low. Her thyroid wasn't functioning properly. And so when she took that medication, it lowered her blood sugar, and her blood sugar was already not really that high. Now, we could have used it as for her, it could have been used for an anti-inflammatory, but it wasn't the right time. So I tend to like to use this medication for patients when their adrenals and their thyroid are in a good place. Those things really need to be addressed first. If your adrenals are low and you give someone like this a medication, or you're listening and you've taken a medication when you're in kind of a burnt out place, one, you're not going to see results, and two, you're probably going to feel a lot worse. And this patient, she had been really tired prior to starting it, but after starting it, she was getting headaches. She was extremely constipated. Her hair did start to fall out, even though she didn't lose any weight, and she was even more frustrated. And she was spending money on this. And anyways, we then worked together for about 4 months. She stopped the medication. I told her it was a pause. We got her adrenals into a better place. We got her thyroid into a better place. And then she has since restarted at a lower dose. And she is now losing a couple pounds a week. She feels fantastic. Her energy is up. Her hair came back. So as you can see, the timing of it really does matter. So for her, she just needed to wait till she got her system stabilized a little bit more. Without... You guys know I've talked about that house analogy. Weight that you want to lose is like a basement closet filled with junk. When your cortisol levels are low, the body has pretty much no energy to do anything, let alone clean out a basement closet, right? And if we're using that house analogy, your body's going to be so focused on making sure keeping the kitchen clean and the bathrooms running and all of that. Giving a GLP-1 medication is like forcing the body to clean out the closet. But in this situation, it was like you were forcing like a teenage boy that didn't want to do it. And the teenage boy was like, F you, I'm going somewhere else, right? So we needed to get her energy back up from a hormone standpoint before she moved to that medication. And I see that pattern that a lot of people are using the incorrect timing. They need to introduce this medication. And one, it needs to be done at the appropriate dosing. I do find people get better results when they take a lower dose than they think that they need, kind of more along the lines of that microdosing thing. But it needs to be done at the appropriate time in someone's kind of weight loss or healing journey. So that's one. Two, kind of the other thing that we typically try to offer these medications to patients who are already making sure that they're eating enough protein and that they are lifting weights. Because one of the other potential drawbacks or side effects or kind of negatives for these medications is that if you're not feeding your muscles, there can be some muscle loss. And this is what happens in a lot of fad diets, right? If you lose weight really, really quickly, it doesn't always tend to be fat. Sometimes it's water weight and sometimes it's muscle weight. And if you lose muscle very, very quickly and then you stop whatever you were doing to lose that weight that equated to muscle, when you stop doing that and you don't have enough muscle is what burns fat. It burns calories. It mops up your glucose and your insulin, as I mentioned earlier. So if you don't have as much muscle mass, it's very easy for you to gain weight back. So making sure that you have enough muscle mass when you head into taking a medication like that, it will make the med work. It will work like a dream. And two, it will make sure that you don't have to worry about the weight coming back on when you discontinue it. So, to keep up muscle mass, you need to be lifting, right? Cardio, this is something I teach into a lot of my patients. Cardio is great, but cardio breaks down muscle. So cardio is really not the best thing to be doing when you're taking a medication like this or you're prepping for a medication like this. You need to be actively lifting weights and lifting weights in a way that like you're building muscle. So that would mean, after 10 reps or so, you can't do anymore. It's the weight is heavy enough that once you get to rep 10, you're like, I'm done. So if you're easily like doing bicep curls and you can do 20 of them, that's fine. You'll do some toning, but you're not going to actually be building new muscle cells. So you want to be constantly building new muscle cells. And then you want to feed your muscle cells with enough protein. So, this is going to vary for every person, but typically, we talk about like trying to aim for 1 gram per pound of body weight, which can be a lot of freaking protein, but I will say that it really, really works. And when you're eating that much protein, you're not really hungry for other things like sugar and junk and whatever. So, if you're taking the microdose, sometimes at that microdose level, your appetite suppression isn't huge, but that's really not, we don't want to be starving ourselves, right? Starving yourselves because a medication made you not hungry is not going to really, it'll get you the results quickly, but it's not going to be lasting, sustaining results. So we want to be using the medication for its benefit in the way that it adjusts glucose and insulin and how the body uptakes those. So again, when you're eating a ton of protein, you're going to keep up muscle mass. And so those are kind of the things that are really, really important. And you want to be doing that before you start that medication. That's what we really work with our patients is like, hey, let's make sure you've already built that habit so that when you introduce this, it's already habit, right? And then, like I said, you're going to get better results. And the other thing that I've found that I think is so, so valuable with these medications is that for a lot of women that I work with that are struggling to lose weight and really want to lose weight, they talk about how much time and energy their thoughts about weight loss and about what to eat and what not to eat, and we call that food noise. One of the really beautiful things about these GLP-1 medications is that they completely turn off food noise for people. And I've had patients in my office coming in like happy tears, being like, for the first time in my entire life, I haven't been so consumed with what should I eat, what shouldn't I eat, and the amount of space that frees up in their brain. And when I look at that, I'm like, wow, they're using so much less of their cortisol. So their system isn't in this stress state around food and eating and dieting and all that thing. So it kind of clears out this whole section in their brain, which allows space for creativity and fun and joy. And so I've had women come in and tell me that, and men too, that it's completely transformed their lives in terms of their mental health, which is fantastic. And the other thing that I've heard people say is they don't crave alcohol as much, which that alone is like a huge, huge benefit. I've had one woman who she was definitely not an alcoholic, but she was drinking and she was not happy with how much she was drinking. But she was like, at the end of the day, I just crave alcohol and I just can't not drink it. And after like week 3 on a very low dose of tirzepatide, she messaged me and she's like, I haven't wanted to drink alcohol at all since I started this medication. And because of that, she was sleeping better, her energy was better, said she was nicer to her partner and to her children. And so she was just over the moon about that. She was kind of like, even if this doesn't make me lose weight or do any other benefits, she's like, that alone has been so, so valuable. So the point of this episode is, I think I still have patients that come in the office and they're like, oh my God, no, those drugs are terrible. They're like cheating and why would I take that? And that's such a bad thing. I think, again, if you use them incorrectly, they can be detrimental to your health, right? And I've seen it. I've had patients where they've lost weight way, way too quickly and they've gotten sick from how fast they've lost weight and it's kind of spurred off some stuff. But then I've seen on the flip side when they're used correctly that they can be literally life-changing for people. So I think just keep your eyes open and your mind open about this. I think there's a lot of I see a lot of judgment going back and forth, like, oh my gosh, she's taking Ozempic, blah, 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 blah. And I'll just share with you guys, I don't usually like to recommend things to my patients if I have not tried them myself. And so I took a very low dose of tirzepatide for a few months before my wedding just to kind of see what is all the hype about. And, I wanted to look really good for my wedding. So I was like, this is a cool tool. But I took about 4 months before I started. I was lifting really heavy. I was eating plenty of protein, and it was actually really, really amazing. For me, the biggest change that I noticed is I love sugar. It's always been kind of the hardest thing about my diet is not eating sugar. Particularly, I love sugar after meals. I don't drink very much alcohol. So for me, I'm like, I want some chocolate or I want something with sugar. And it was I just didn't even want that anymore. And I think a lot of people want sugar after meals when there is some mild insulin resistance going on, right? You've eaten and your stomach is full, but your cells didn't actually get enough glucose that they thought they were getting, and so you crave more sugar. And so for me, it completely took that away, and that was really, really cool. I wasn't thinking about sugar. I wasn't beating myself up about wanting sugar, so it did definitely free up some space there. And, the things that I noticed was my rings were looser, the sweat, like, I normally get like, when I would eat sugar, my hands would get a little swollen and like, hot from like a histamine response. That all went away. So, and I've had a couple patients with MCAS, which is a difficulty processing histamine issue, that it's been really helpful for them in that regard. And, and I since have stopped taking the medication, and weight has not changed at all. I still feel fantastic. And it really feels like in my body that it reset something. It literally reset how my body, I still am not craving sugar hardly at all, which is really kind of cool to me. So I just want, again, to reiterate that they can be fantastic tools when used correctly. Now, the tricky thing is, in a lot of the like prescription, like the Zepbound or Wegovy, they're like the pre-filled pens that you can use, they are at a higher starting dose than a lot of like the microdosing would be. So I find it to be more helpful for using a compounded version of the medications, because then you can adjust the dosing. And now the compounding medications, they're mixing them with a B12 or a B6, which kind of helps with a lot of other things. And so if it's something you've been thinking about, but you're like, ooh, that feels like cheating, or I'm not sure if that's for me, have an honest conversation with your provider about it, or talk to a functional doc or someone that kind of is well versed in it, because you might be surprised at what it could actually benefit you with. I've had the other kind of things we've seen is we've had some patients with polycystic ovarian syndrome, which is when the body stops ovulating, you skip periods, and it's very, very hard for women to get pregnant if they have that condition. I've had patients that hadn't had a period for 2 years start on tirzepatide. Within 2 months, they get a period, and I've had a couple patients trying to get pregnant, and they've now gotten pregnant and have had no issues, and that's been really cool to see. And in PCOS, insulin resistance is one of the biggest drivers of that condition, and so using these medications to reset that insulin sensitivity literally changes how their body talks to hormones and talks to ovaries. And one of the other things we've seen really beneficial is we work with a lot of menopausal women, and we start them on hormone replacement therapy, and anything in the body, like hormones or glucose or anything, it has to attach to the cell in order to do its job. And it's really interesting. I've seen that when we pair the low therapeutic doses of a GLP-1 with HRT or hormone replacement therapy, I see the results that we're looking for with HRT come so much faster. And I'm not entirely sure what exactly the mechanism is there. I think, a lot of women in menopause are kind of struggling to lose weight. And I think, a lot of the food noise is taking up a lot of space. And so I think partially it's like clearing out some of that stress that's in their brain. And that's allowing, the hormones to actually do their job more. The body's not shunting everything over to cortisol because they're a little calmer and more relaxed. I think that's a piece of it. It does work to help lose weight, which is fantastic. And, most of us, we feel better when we're at a weight that makes us feel good. So again, they can be a fantastic tool when used correctly. And again, they can definitely be misused. And so you do have to be careful, but when you use them correctly, they can be just an amazing tool. So I love natural medicine, and I love berberine. Berberine is one of my favorite herbs, and it will do the same thing. It just takes a lot longer. And by a lot longer, I mean like a year, right? Versus in a medication like this, you can see results a little bit faster. And would I love to say, yes, we shouldn't use these medications, we should only use herbs? Yes and no. I mean, at the end of the day, when we see something that's so effective at lowering inflammation, so take someone who's in menopause who has gained weight and their cholesterol's gone up because of the dropping estrogen, and their, blood sugar is high, they're pre-diabetic, they're at a higher risk for cardiovascular events, they're at a higher risk for stroke. So using whatever tool we have to get their inflammation down in a more timely fashion is actually more of a holistic approach than being like, hey, I want you to take berberine at this high dose for the next 2 years and we'll see what happens, kind of thing. And I'm not saying that not saying there's anything wrong with using natural things, but I think when we combine things together, you can just get a much better result. And I've actually seen a lot of patients that do like an even lower dose of a GLP-1, and we add in berberine with it, and that actually works really, really well. And like I said, berberine is probably one of my favorite herbs, because of what it does. It kind of has a GLP-1 like action in the system. It's great for killing off bad bugs in the gut. It kills all kinds of bacteria that shouldn't be living in the body, so it's helpful in that regard. A GLP-1 medication is not going to do that. So when we add those together, you get like a really, really potent and effective treatment protocol. So If you guys have questions about this, which I'm sure you will, because this is a topic that people are kind of like, I'm not sure how I feel about it. Again, I sit down with patients a lot and they're like, I don't know, I've read a lot of the side effects, I'm not sure. Read more about it. There are tons of studies now looking at how, the microdosing is really helping to lower inflammation. You're welcome to DM me, call and schedule a free consult with any one of our providers, because, we are using these medications with quite a lot of patients and seeing phenomenal results. And so again, it is a fantastic tool that if this is something you're wanting to work on, lowering inflammation, losing weight, that is accessible to you. So anyways, thank you guys for listening, and we'll see you next week.
Thank you for tuning in today. If you enjoyed this conversation, be sure to connect with me on social media to find more helpful tips and information. You can find me at Dr. Kinney on all of the platforms. And please be sure to subscribe and leave a rating and/or a review. This helps grow the show so more people have access to this knowledge that leads to empowered healing. Love and light, and see you next week.